Hey everybody, this is Erica, the technology nerd who likes to film stuff, and it's freezing! Oh my gosh, I moved to Washington not too long ago. I'm from California, where it's nice and sunny all day, every day, and even in winter, it's like a nice tepid 70 degrees often, so this is crazy! So if any of you want to know why I'm wearing a jacket, that's why. Anyway, what's going on today is I am doing the Nexus 5 full in-depth review. I finally have had a chance to check everything out. This is a great little phone for the price. I came out pretty impressed. There are some quirks here and there, which I will talk about. So I'll talk about the good points and the bad points, and hopefully you can decide if this guy is for you, or maybe if you'd be more well off with one of the other Snapdragon S800 phones that have come out this year. But really, with the price point, you can't beat this. So starting off with build quality, I'm happy to say that even though this is a relatively cheap device, this does not feel cheap. And I have to thank that soft touch finish because of that. That has really helped in keeping it feel not so cheap, especially when you're talking about something like the Galaxy S4, which is similar in size. But this glossy plastic just doesn't feel so nice, and it's also glossy on the side. So that soft touch really does give it something extra. Now, one thing to note is that if you get the white version, the back is going to be a matte white finish, but the sides are going to be black just like this, though they're going to be glossy instead of a matte finish. So I really prefer this soft touch over the glossy. Also, there is no bending or creaking to speak of, so it feels like a very sturdy, solid little phone. And we are protected by Gorilla Glass 3, which in my own usage I am happy to say has fared quite a bit better than Gorilla Glass 2. With Gorilla Glass 2, I was always seeing scratches here and there, but I seem to be having better luck with Gorilla Glass 3. Of course, if you bring it around sand, it's going to scratch all the same, and if you drop it, it's going to crack just as easily. But that native damage resistance specifically for scratches just makes them not as easy to happen, and less noticeable if they do. So if you drop this guy on the ground, expect the glass to break. I have seen some drop tests, and I've seen that it tends to break along the bottom here, revealing the board underneath. So get yourself a case. Gorilla Glass 3 is only a little bit better for scratches, but not much else. Now what I'm noticing here is that this soft touch does accumulate fingerprints quite easily. It looks a little bit grimy, but luckily this is actually very easy to wipe off. Just rub it against your shirt for a few seconds, and already you can see it's much better. And what I also notice is that the soft touch backing doesn't scratch so easily, which is a nice feature because I have not been carrying this around in a case. I've been able to sit it down here and there, and I'm not so worried about it scratching on the back, although this camera does protrude here just a little bit, so if you're going to be tossing around your phone a lot, I'd probably recommend getting a case for that sake. From a dimension standpoint, you can see that it looks very similar to the Galaxy S4 in size. I've also noticed that they're pretty much exactly the same thickness. Now, while I admire the soft touch on this device, what I have liked about the Galaxy S4 in comparison, since we're talking about size here, is that this just has a much better palmability. The Galaxy S4 has rounded corners that feel nice in the palm when you squeeze down on it, and one of my slight complaints about the Nexus 5 is that it feels a little bit sharp in hand. You can see that these corners are a bit more boxy, and I've noticed that this back cover is joined to the sides, and it's joined in such a way that it's not perfectly mesh, so I can feel that poking into my palm a little bit. But all that's taken is just an adjustment to learn what feels best with this device, and it has not been a problem thus far. So taking a bit of a look around the device, we have an 8 megapixel camera on the back. It's also optical image stabilized, which is something that I am really loving to see in cameras these days because it helps with motion blur. Here is a single LED flash. Underneath here is the NFC antenna. The back cover is not user replaceable. Underneath is only a 2300 mAh battery, exactly the same as the HTC One. We will get into battery life a little bit later, but no, under normal circumstances you can't take this battery cover off and just replace the battery yourself, which would have been really nice, considering that the battery isn't the best. On the top here we have a standard headphone jack, we've got a microphone here. On the side we have a micro SIM tray, and also we have a power button, ceramic power button. It's rather clicky and responsive. Same thing with the volume rocker, also ceramic. So these have been quite nice. On the bottom, I am sorry to say that we only really do have one speaker. I'm actually holding my fingers over it right now. It's the one that's on the left. You can see here that nothing happens when you hold down the grill on the right. So yes, there indeed is only one speaker, and this guy right here is actually the microphone. So just like we have on iPhones, it's for aesthetic reasons, but one is a speaker and one is indeed a microphone. On the front here we have a proximity sensor. We've also got the receiver. This is interesting because on the white one, the receiver isn't black like this, it's white. Although the rest of the face here is black just the same. And then we have a 1.3 megapixel front-facing camera. We've also got our notification LED right here at the bottom, which is a very inconspicuous place to have it. I often miss it. That's something that I've missed this entire time. But indeed, there is a notification LED right here. What's nice though is that it's an RGB LED. That means you can make pretty much any color, and you can customize it using an application that's called Light Flow. So with Light Flow, you can customize your notifications to say charging battery. If I go underneath light, I have chosen the color yellow, and you can see we actually do have a yellow notification light. You're also able to change the speed. It's going so erratically like this because I wanted it to be more apparent, because the LED is something I usually miss, so you can make your notifications have a very quick pulsing light, so that's really nice. You can see I was able to create an orangey here as well, so you can really choose anything, and also you can make custom colors as well, so it's quite handy. Now moving on to the OS and all the goodness that we have here, this is Android version 4.4 KitKat. One of the major appeals of this phone for me is having KitKat on here. Even though it feels like a mild update, there's just something about having the newest, latest, and greatest Android. Though I have to say right now that Android 4.4 KitKat is a little bit buggy, and I will be getting into that in terms of battery life in a little bit. It's fun to have the newest stuff, but at the same time, we're guinea pigs. I really like what they've done with Google Now. It's something that I never used before because primarily you had to swipe up from the top, and I thought that was a little bit lame. It wasn't so intuitive and not something I would normally do, so now once you swipe to the right, it pulls it up there right for you as well. It just feels kind of like the HTC One now, kind of like the Blink Feed tab. So the idea in a UI is that if it's easy to access and something that I would do normally with a finger swipe that I've trained myself with Android, obviously I'm going to be going to the right, or sweeping through a bunch of panels for that matter. So now I've actually made a point to use it, something that I have never done before, and what I'm liking about Google Now is it's more concise. There used to be a crazy amount of settings for Google Now, endless menus of things that you could activate, but now it seems to be more automated and just learns you over time. So we can go ahead and click this guy here, and it lets you customize Google Now. Now, depending on what you do during your day and certain patterns, it will detect those things. So your only categories now to set up are sports team stocks, places, and then everything else. And over time, it seems to add more and more things to the list depending on what you're doing with your day. I like how they have options accessible at the bottom. You can also easily add reminders under here, which you can do manually by typing them in, or you can simply just add it yourself by saying something like, "Okay, Google, make me an appointment to see the doctor tomorrow at 5 p.m. And you can see how it does this very easily. But again, if you don't like having Google really pay attention to what you're doing throughout the day and randomly report and also waste your battery, I would just recommend to disable this guy. That's something that's very simple to do. Just hit the menu button here, hit Settings, and you can easily disable Google Now. But if you do that, it's going to reset all of your cards, so just keep that in mind. Probably my favorite thing here is the Google Voice activation for Google Search. Now what it says right here is you can say, "Okay, Google," and it's going to let you search for whatever at that point. And the voice recognition is actually quite awesome. But I also like that there are some quirks that you can say as well, such as, "Okay, Jarvis." So I've been able to get it to respond to a couple of things. I think that Google tried to have a little bit of fun with it. A question that some people might ask is that if you disable Google Now, which I did, you can see it just gets rid of it entirely. If you try to go to your right, nothing's going to happen, but it does not get rid of the Google Voice recognition, so that's not something that is going to be taken away from you. It's not actually part of Google Now. Also, what's nice with Google Voice recognition is I can say something like, "Okay, Google, let's watch Presto." You can see I can play a request right from here, all without touching it. So that's probably nice if you have grimy fingers. So there's a lot of fun stuff that you can do with the Google Voice search. You can activate easily any applications on your phone, and you can also create emails that you can send all without touching the phone. I can say something like, "Okay, Google, email Susie." "Susie, you are very strange."
Here's your email. Do you want to send it?
"Yes, please."
Sending email.
And I just sent Susie a message. Susie is a fake person, by the way. It's kind of a crazy little character that I do. Moving on. One thing that has confused me a little bit with KitKat is the fact that when you turn on the phone, of course, you see the lock screen, and a lot of people like to have lock screen widgets. I remember that it used to be enabled by default, so you can see easily, you can go to the left, and then you can go ahead and add something, whatever you would like. But these days, it's not enabled by default, and it's actually under a very odd place. I didn't know where to go looking for this. So to enable lock screen widgets, they have it underneath the security setting, underneath settings. I would have thought, maybe look underneath display or something. I would not have thought to go underneath security to enable lock screen widgets. Let's go ahead and disable it. This is, again, by default. So when you turn on your display for the first time and want to add your lock screen widgets, don't expect anything to happen. So that was a wee bit confusing. Also now, when you hold down on one of the home launcher screens, just like so, you can see that we have 3 different settings at the bottom: wallpapers, widgets, and settings. Now settings, curiously, you would think would bring you into settings, but when you click on it, it brings you underneath Google Now. I'm not exactly sure what their thinking was here, but alright. Wallpapers and widgets is appropriate though. Now, as far as how to add home screens, you can see that we have our home launcher panels here, but you wouldn't quite know what to do with this. Like, how do you add a panel? There is no plus or place to add a panel from under here. Actually, it seems that the only way to do this is to go underneath your app tray and just say Candy Crush Saga. And then you just want to drag to your far right. And here we go. It's just created another panel. You can do this with widgets as well. Then you're given uninstall and app info. What's nice though is that it seems you can have unlimited panels. I was able to create, I don't even know how many, 30, 50, and it doesn't seem to stop anywhere. So you can have panels to your heart's content. Another thing I've noticed is that they've created kind of an integrated inbox in terms of text messaging. It seems they've taken away the texting application in favor of merging it with Google Hangouts. So if I go underneath Google Hangouts, what you can see here is that this is a distinction. You can see people's names, but there's no personal information, so whatever. We have SMS, and then we have Google Talk. So I was able to respond to my mom by SMS or on Google Talk. Now, once you are underneath a certain text message, it gives you the drop-down bar, and you can choose whether you want to contact that person again underneath Google Talk, or if you want to send them an SMS to their phone number. So a lot of people have not been liking this. Many people like to have a texting app and then just keep Hangouts entirely separate. For me, though, it hasn't been so confusing because they do let you know whether it's an SMS, and if there is no icon saying SMS, then it's going to be to Google Hangout, Google Talk. So for me, it really hasn't been so bad. If for whatever reason this really is something that bothers you, you can download a separate SMS application. So go underneath your menu here and then hit Settings. And then once you are underneath Settings, you're going to be able to see SMS. And then underneath General, you're going to see SMS Enabled Touch to change your default application. And I've chosen Chomp SMS. So now whenever I get text messages, they're going to Chomp instead of to Google Hangout. This is a little bit of a convoluted process, and probably some people might not figure this out, but this option is in there. Another thing that some people like and some people don't is what they've done to the dialer. I actually really like what they've done with this. You're going to be brought to default to your search contacts and nearby places page. So what happens with this page is you're not automatically given all your contacts, although if you do hit all contacts, it's going to just bring you to the contacts that you already have in your phone that are synced with Google or that you've added yourself. Otherwise, they arrange this according to your favorites or to the people that you talk to the most, so for example, some various family members. But don't fret, you can easily just hit all contacts if you want to see alphabetically all of the people that you have. What I like in particular about this is that they have merged it with Google, so it's like a phone book, and then you have your phone book that's nested inside of your phone book, and it's actually pretty clever. So just say that there's a contact that's not inside of my phone, Disneyland. And you can see it brings up several different options that I can call. So I find this to be quite handy. And if at any point you feel annoyed, all you need to do is touch this and it brings you right into your dialer. So I actually really like the implementation. Clicking here, you get to your call history, and then here you have your bar for settings. And we also have some other stuff inside of here, so if I say settings, we're going to see caller ID. This is something that I really like. So just say that there's a number from somebody who calls you and you don't know who this business is. So if you have this enabled, it's going to show names for people and businesses that are not in your contacts. So honestly, for me, this is what a dialer should be like. Now, another thing that I'm noticing that they have changed is location. You can see underneath here you have your toggles, which you can easily get to by using 2 fingers or simply just tapping this here. So underneath location, we no longer have a GPS setting. Everything is integrated right into here. I feel like with KitKat they really tried to downsize settings, although some of it is a little bit confusing. It's almost like learning a new operating system at the same time. So for location settings, I have location settings on. You have a couple of different modes. You've got high accuracy, which is going to keep the GPS on, so there's your GPS mode. It keeps Wi-Fi and mobile networks on to estimate your location. So using triangulation from all of these things, this has the best accuracy. If you click battery saving, all this is going to do is turn off the GPS, but you still have Wi-Fi and mobile networks. And then you have a device only, which is just GPS setting. You've also got access to Google location reporting from underneath the location setting. I usually keep Google location reporting off, as it tends to wake up your device here and there, and I think that it just wastes battery power. Now, underneath the launcher, we're going to look at a couple of applications that they have spiced up. What I like inside the launcher is that instead of being that black, boring it was before, it's now transparent and feels integrated as part of the system. The idea reminds me more of Samsung TouchWiz, or kind of what Apple is doing now with iOS 7. You're never truly leaving the initial environment. What has interested me most is that there's two different photo applications. There's Photos, and then we also have the standard Gallery application. Now, I really don't see anything too special underneath the Gallery application itself, though I do like all the editing settings that you can use for your pictures. So you've got several different filters, you can add frames, you can crop, which includes a couple of things. And as I've seen before, you can manipulate the image by messing with the gamma and such. The cool part here is the Photos application, and what we're presented with is what looks like the Google Plus app. Actually, you can access Google Plus right from there. So they have all kinds of settings here. There's a nice sidebar, which you can swipe to the right and it will bring it up. So getting rid of this menu for a second, we're brought into camera and also highlights. So camera is pretty self-explanatory. It's just pictures I have taken or screenshots, and also some auto awesome stuff that I created as well. I will be showing you how to do that. But when you go underneath highlights, it's going to bring you into pretty much everything that you've backed up to Google+. So I have a crazy amount of pictures here. This is stuff that's dating back several months. So it's really nice to have access to everything right in here. Looking back at the Gallery app, you do have access to all of your backed up content as well. But just like if you were to go underneath Google Plus and look at all your backed up photos, you have access to highlights as well. So you can either view all of your highlights, which gives you an idea of what went on that particular day in terms of photos or content. And then if you click this guy here, it's going to bring you into everything. Honestly, this is kind of reminding me of HTC Zoe. These here are all pictures that I have taken with the Nexus 5, ones that have the HDR Plus setting on and ones that don't have it on. So you can see along the top here, we're given a couple of things. You've got your standard menu, you can search through your photos, and there's this new thing here. If you click on this, it's bringing you into really what looks like Zoe and HTC's highlight reel. So what you can do with this is you can select a bunch of pictures from a particular album, and let's go ahead and turn it to the side. So if you swipe left or right, you can choose the type of effect. So let's just say 8mm for example. And you can also decide to choose from several different types of music tracks. So we're just going to keep the default. You can decide how long you want it to be. Right now it's at 30 seconds. So 30 seconds is the default. You're able to go in and arrange everything that you have here. So for example, if this is a video, and you can crop to how much you would like to be in here or what point you would like it to start at or stop at. So we can choose a couple of seconds here, and then we can go back outward. So now you can see 7 seconds. You can arrange what we're seeing here. The only thing that you can't do is select on the photos and then edit them inside of here. You have to edit them first and then add them later. So when you're satisfied with the order of things, you can hit play, and then you can enjoy your video creation that you've made. Of course, if you want to, you can add a title and save it. And as I showed you before, it saved it underneath camera, so here I have 2 that I had created. So yeah, this is entirely like HTC One's highlight reel, but the nice thing as well is what we have right here. You see we have several different categories, and right here it says Auto Awesome. So Auto Awesome, a lot of you have already seen underneath Google+. If you go underneath Auto Awesome, what Google does is that they look through all of your pictures, they try to match things, and they try to artfully manipulate things. So it will go through your albums and take certain photos from certain days, and it will make Auto Awesome movies. So just like I showed you, it will create a movie all by itself, adding its own effects and transitions, which I have found to be pretty fun. Otherwise, Auto Awesome goes through all of your content the same, and it likes to find things that are similar, such as pictures. This is actually two different pictures that you can see that the white balance is different here than here, but you can see that it does a really great job of stitching things together, and now it's all available here on the phone. So I took some awkward pictures of myself with the front-facing camera at Costco, and Auto Awesome went through and found similar pictures and decided to put a neat little collage together for me. If you want to know the thinking behind the generation here, you can click on the Auto Awesome button, and it's going to say mix, so it decided to mix these photos by itself. This photo booth style picture was created for multiple portraits. So once in a while, I love going underneath the Auto Awesome section on Google+, and now I can access it on my phone and see what silliness Google has done. It also steals snapshots from other pictures. This action was created from a set of photos capturing movement, and it also makes GIF files. You can see under Details, indeed it's a motion GIF, and it was several different pictures I took with the Galaxy S4, several different exposures. And it found these and decided to make a GIF out of it, like a moving willow. It did the same with my little brother who was eating a Snicker bar who wasn't too happy to be the subject of several pictures, but Auto Awesome decided to humiliate him further and create a GIF file. So as for the rest of this side menu, I like what they've done categorically. You can see you have your Google+, you can get inside of your photos, you can get inside of your albums. Of course, you saw Auto Awesome. We can also get to all of my videos, backed up and on the phone. They have photos of you, so anything where I was tagged, it's included under here. And then you've got your trash bin, so anything that you delete is going to show up under here. So I'm quite liking what we have under here. Also, if you go underneath your photos, you can get into editing as well, so you don't need to go back into the gallery. This is a bath ducky that my dad decided to use for a scissor holder. Poor little thing. So this is some pretty great stuff here. Keep note though, underneath the Photos application, what you have for settings for editing and manipulating photos is a little bit different. You have the auto enhance, rotate, crop, and filters, but they're just slightly different. So there's a lot that can be done here. I also like this feature where you can hold down and compare the original and immediately see what the edited version looked like. So I think Google has done a really great job here. What's also nice now is that when you play music, if you turn off the phone, turn it back on, you can see that we have the full album art on the home screen, which is better than what we had before, which was that little box that was showing the album cover. So this looks much nicer. What's not obvious here is that if you're wanting to seek inside of a track, you can see you have backwards, forwards, pause, play. If you hold down here, it's going to bring up your seek bar. So you do have access to it from right here, it's just not obvious. But still we have some improvements that just make this so much better. The last thing that I am loving is the amount of emojis that we now have under the AOSP keyboard. This is really pretty nice. So overall, I'm liking the slight changes to KitKat, although some things are a little bit unintuitive. So I'm hoping to see improvements over time here, but this is a good step in the right direction. So now moving on to the quality of the display, it's 4.95 inches, full HD IPS display, so it's 1080p, 445 pixels per inch, so it looks pretty sharp. And as I mentioned before, it's protected with Gorilla Glass 3. So in terms of viewing angles, they're pretty decent. I'm not really seeing any color shifting to speak of, but what some people do complain about is that at certain angles the display tends to wash out. Now that we're in the dark, you can see what I mean here. So when you have it straight on, it's fine, but when you turn it to the side, some people are complaining about that washout. Otherwise, at this price point, it's a pretty decent display. It's also a pretty bright display. I've been able to measure 500 nits. So in the brightness department, it does pretty well. It also seems to do fairly decent in direct sunlight. I have to say though that Google has messed up with the auto brightness a little bit because for some reason they have the auto brightness at too bright for the particular ambient environment that you're in. So you often get backlight that's too bright for the environment, and that's not so good for battery life. I'm also going to be showing you some measurements of the display so you can see what's going on in terms of calibration. Now off the bat, the calibration really is not so bad, but the one thing is that gamma is a little bit too low. When you have gamma that's a little bit too low, you'll have colors that look a little bit washed out or colors that are a little bit light. It makes me feel like I want the colors to be just a little bit more saturated, and that's exactly what actually making the gamma higher does. When you make gamma higher, you're actually increasing saturation or increasing the richness of that color. When you have gamma that's a little bit too low, you get colors that look too light, as if they were just undersaturated. Now moving on to the processors that we have in this guy. A lot of people love this device because it's so up to date. Just like the other flagship devices on the market, Google's idea is to create a flagship at a cheaper price so that people want to buy this and are inclined to buy this over something like the Galaxy Note 3. So they did a good job by keeping bleeding edge hardware inside this thing, but of course people want to know about the performance. So needless to say, this is a Snapdragon S800 SoC. It's got 4 Crate 400 cores clocked at 2.3 GHz or 2.26 GHz measured speed. It's also got the Adreno 330 GPU. It's got 2 GB of RAM, which is pretty standard for this SoC. So the number one thing that people want to know all the time, pretty much needlessly, is how does this guy perform in benchmarks? So the sad thing is they'll grab the Nexus 5 and they'll compare it to something like the Galaxy Note 3 and they'll be like, wow, this guy just doesn't perform as well. One thing to remark about is that Samsung and Sony and LG and a couple of other OEMs actually cheat on the benchmarks. Some people don't want to call it cheating, but what they're doing is they're actually locking the CPU cores at maximum so that as soon as you go into benchmarks, it's going to be at max CPU speed. And of course, then you're going to get an embellished score over what you would have otherwise. The thing about Nexus devices is that they don't cheat here. So here we have System Monitor opened, and it's telling me what's going on with the cores. So for example, just say let's go into Quadrant. With something like the Galaxy Note 3, as soon as you touched Quadrant and it opened up, all of these guys would be maxed at 2.3 GHz, but that's just not happening here. It's just running standard depending on the load. So when you say run full benchmark, even once you hit run full benchmark, it's just doing what it needs. You can see there's all 4 cores running at 1.6 GHz. It's not at 2.3 though. And it just works according to what's going on. So in terms of benchmarks, this device really isn't so interesting, especially when I've seen something like the Xperia Z Ultra get a score of 21,000. Other devices like the Galaxy Note 3 are getting 19,000, 20,000. So to see something like 6,000, you're like, what's going on here? One thing that I do have to note about this phone is that there is quite a bit of CPU throttling. I do have Trepin loaded on here. This is Qualcomm's. We're going to go open up Trepin. So this Trepin profiler lets you see what's going on with the CPU, lets you see what's going on with the GPU, you can see what's going on with the battery. This just profiles so many things. I did analyze a few runs while playing a couple of games. So for example, I was playing Real Racing 3, and I did this from a cold start. Let's go ahead and analyze it. I'm going to show you what the graph had looked like. I played it for about 9 minutes. Now what you can see here is definitely some throttling. You can see that we're starting out at 2.26 measured speed for CPU frequency. You're starting at 2.26, and then after only a little bit over a minute or so, you're starting to already see some throttling. That's this next step downward, which doesn't last for long. Then you can see that you're already throttled down to 1.5 gigahertz, and then not soon after, you're stuck down to around 1.2 gigahertz. Now, once you are throttled, you can see that the CPU frequency stays throttled the rest of the time. And downward a little bit more, we can look at the GPU frequency as well. Now on the Nexus 4, the GPU throttling was absolutely terrible. Once the device had gotten to about 39 degrees Celsius, you would have the GPU frequency drop to about half. And once the GPU had gotten to about half frequency, you would see so many frame drops. You would have about half speed in games. So instead of being somewhere around 24 to 30 frames per second, you would be downward below 15 frames per second, somewhere around 12. And at that point, gameplay just really suffered. So what I'm happy to say is that's not such a problem on here. I do see quite a bit of variety in what's going on with the GPU, depending on the game that you're playing. 450 megahertz is the max frequency for the GPU. And you can see here that after a couple of minutes, we're stuck along 337 megahertz. But let's go back outward and look at a different trial that I had done with a different game. I was playing Asphalt 8 as well, so let's go ahead and analyze that run. You can see we have the exact same behavior here in terms of throttling, but once you look down at the GPU frequency, you can see it's staying pretty much along 450 megahertz the entire time. I had also done this in Need for Speed Most Wanted as well, and you can see here that it's still able to hit 450 megahertz. So in terms of throttling for the GPU, it really looks like it just depends on the game and the demand of the game as well, but I don't really see throttling as an issue for the GPU. Looking back again at Asphalt 8, even though I don't see GPU throttling as an issue that's causing frame drops in gameplay, you still have to pay attention to CPU throttling. The GPU and CPU both work together in gameplay, so of course if you have quite a bit of throttling for the CPU, it's going to limit the frame rates. And I do notice that a little bit, especially when I was playing Asphalt 8 after several minutes. I had noticed in this particular game that the frame rate started to look pretty choppy at some points. Yet I noticed that it really depended on the game. So for the most part in games, even though we do have some CPU throttling, I'm noticing that things look decently smooth most of the time. I do notice that this device tends to throttle a little bit quicker than some other devices, yet for most people I think this is going to get the job done just fine. But as for smoothness and the rest of the phone, this is pretty much one of the quickest little devices that I have seen. Touch responsiveness is great. This is definitely one of my go-to phones in terms of smoothness. So even though the CPU is throttling here and there, it's not really enough for me to feel around the phone. Now getting into audio and speaker quality, one thing that I had mentioned already is that yes, it looks like there's two speakers here, but in fact there's only one. On the left side is your speaker and on the right side is your microphone. As for why we have holes like this on both sides, it's just for the aesthetic appeal of it. The one thing about having the speakers at the bottom like this, it goes for the same thing on the iPhone, is that it's very easy to obstruct. A lot of the times when I play games, I hold the phone like this, where we have the receiver near my left hand and the speakers near my right. The only thing is that here you see, as soon as you're holding it, what's going on? You've got your palm blocking the speaker, and the way that it's curved at the bottom, it's perfectly molded to my hand, so it just completely blocks it. Now, of course, you can just take the phone and turn it the other way, and then at this point, you're not blocking that speaker, but you have some apps that are stubborn and won't rotate. So I tend to prefer speakers that are on the back, where it's not as easy to obstruct. In terms of the speaker quality though, on the bottom, it gets decently loud. Although in applications like GPS, I wish it got just a tad bit louder. In terms of loudness, it's definitely not terrible though. I do have to mention that there have been a few people who have had issues with the sound on the bottom, saying that it sounds obstructed more or less, or that it's just too quiet, and it turns out that there are some devices that do in fact have some glue underneath here that's obstructing the speakers. That was something that Adam Outler of XDA Developers found, and he has directions of how to fix that. A simple Google search, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. Adam Outler and fix Nexus 5 audio. But that's not a true representative sample of this device, and that's a true defect. But that's not something that I have experienced on my device. When listening to music and playing games, I'm glad that I'm not hearing any distortion or clipping. They're not the best speakers for a phone, but they're definitely not horrible either. An actual bug that I am noticing, as I tend to use wired headsets a lot, I go to the gym a lot, and I'm always running on the treadmill listening to music or watching Netflix, and I also make phone calls from time to time, and that's when I had noticed it. This is something that's very widely reported as a bug, and I'm hoping Google fixes this. So basically, if you have a pair of wired earphones that also have a microphone on them for making phone calls, I've tried this with both my Apple earbuds and also the Samsung earbuds, the standard fare that come with the Galaxy phones, such as the Note 3 or the Galaxy S4. So right here we have Smart Voice Recorder. What's going on is there is an issue with the gain on the microphone, that's the inline mic. People are reporting that when a person is talking through a wired headset on the Nexus 5, that the voice that's coming through the other end to the person they're talking to is just too quiet through the microphone on these headsets. So we're going to make an example of this. I'm just going to plug this in here. I've got the Apple microphone right here. I'm just going to hold it up to my face as we're doing the recording. You'll be able to see the decibel levels right here. So we are now testing the audio. You can see that the decibel levels are actually quite low here. Now watch what happens. I'm going to pause this. It's now paused. The only workaround that I know of right now is to unplug it. This is pretty convoluted and silly. Hold down the center button and replug them in. Do not let go of that center button. Now that the center button is plugged in, let's go ahead and push play. I'm going to hold this close to my face, and you can see that now the decibel levels are much, much louder. So this is a definite problem. It's annoying. It was annoying to me, and it's definitely there. So hopefully Google will fix this. Oh, by the way, once you plug it in, you can let go of that center button. Interesting, Google. So how about the quality when listening to music through earphones? The first thing that I am noticing is that opposed to what GSM Arena had posted about the audio output being pretty low, I don't see why they say that, really, at all. It's actually pretty loud, gets fairly loud. The other thing that I am noticing is that while the sound isn't bad, it just doesn't sound very lively. It's kind of flat sounding to me, especially in comparison with something like the iPhone 5S. Also, the stereo separation is not too good, and when you don't have a very large stereo separation, you tend to have leaking between the left and right channels of audio, and once they leak too much, it starts to sound like mono audio. So that is also unfortunate and tends to ruin the experience a little bit. Unlike the Galaxy S4 and even the LG G2, I noticed that it doesn't have a poor upsampling algorithm going on, which can introduce artifacts into the audio, so at least I'm grateful for that. I was able to determine that by using Super Curio's Voodoo Audio Measurements player, so at least yay for that. But still, overall, the audio is a decent experience. It's a very personal experience, so it's really going to depend on what you particularly think about it, but I really do think that most people will be pleased. Now moving on to battery life, I have used this guy as my daily driver for several weeks now, so I feel like I've got a very good handle on what the battery life is like. In general, and at this point, I can say that battery life really is not so good. I'm sure there are tweaks, and there are going to be a bunch of tweaks that people do in order to get this guy functioning at least better than this, but with the battery capacity of only 2,300 milliamp hours, please don't be expecting this guy to last you throughout the day if you're a heavy user. You're going to need to be charging it at least once. So here we have a day where I did not use this device really vigorously. I mostly had used it for a little bit of web browsing and also Google Hangouts. And I was able to get 3 hours and 45 minutes of screen time at best. I have not been able to top this yet. Now here is an instance where I used this guy very heavily all throughout the day. I had used Google Hangouts for hours on top of everything else that I do during the day, such as checking my email and browsing the web. So I was able to achieve 6 hours and 14 minutes and a screen time of 3 hours and 21 minutes. So I'm really not seeing the screen time that I would like to see here. And during a time where I did nothing but play games, I was only able to get 3 hours and 27 minutes out of this guy. The screen time says 2 hours and 19 minutes, but honestly, I was not able to break the 2-hour mark for gameplay. So you've got an incredibly powerful processor in this guy, and you've got a powerful GPU as well. If you want to use this guy as your main daily driver, just be aware that you're going to need to charge it a few times through the day. And that's something that I've really just resolved to doing by now. I am near a charger most of the day. I also have a big battery bank that I carry around as well, so this is something to just keep in mind. But honestly, right now if you're trying to decide between the Nexus 5 and the LG G2, and battery life is something that's important to you, I would definitely 100% go with the LG G2. It's got a 3000 milliamp hour battery in there, and it really makes a difference. In terms of screen time for the LG G2, I was easily able to get 6 hours of screen time, versus maybe the 3.5 on this guy. The good news with the Nexus 5 and the battery life is that even though the battery life isn't so long, at least this device charges pretty fast. With a supplied charger, it takes a little bit less than 2 hours to charge from 0 to 100%, so if you are feeling stuck at 30% battery life, you can plug it in for even a half hour and you will be safe. The last thing that I want to mention about battery life that's actually not central to the Nexus 5 and has been an issue for a while now that Google has not fixed for some reason is that instead of the CPU powering down and staying in deep sleep mode all throughout the night, or particularly when the phone is idle, the device ends up staying awake. So here was an example overnight where I wasn't doing anything with the phone, and instead of the phone being in a deep sleep state, you can see that the phone stayed awake for nearly 7 hours. So you can imagine my dismay when I see almost 20% battery drained overnight, not doing anything. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at rogue services that are using the Wi-Fi, and these essentially keep the CPU from going into a deep sleep mode. So over the next few days, I want to run a little bit of an experiment where I close down all applications before I go to bed. Or even better yet, I will turn Wi-Fi off entirely, but keep in mind, you need to go underneath Settings and underneath Advanced, and you're going to see Scanning Always Available. This says let Google's location service and other apps scan for networks even when the Wi-Fi is off. So of course, even if the Wi-Fi is off, but the applications that have these rogue services are able to still access your network, it won't do you any good. So make sure to get rid of Scanning Always Available, and then just simply turn Wi-Fi off and see what happens. That's at least what I'm going to do. And at that point, of course, it should solve the issue. But this is not a solution. So come on, Google, get it together! Now getting into connectivity such as Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, reception, call quality. I'm in a very low reception area at this moment. Down here in my room I get very poor reception, but generally I notice that the reception on the Nexus 5 is actually pretty decent. In general though, I don't like talking about reception abilities because it depends on your network, it depends on the area that you're in. Also, the call quality has not been so bad at all. I am able to hear people clearly and they can hear me clearly as well. With my handset, I haven't heard any type of garbling or weird noise or anything like that, so call quality has been a decent experience. As for cell and data connectivity, we do have 3G and 4G. The 4G is going to be market dependent. There's actually two different versions of the phone. That's what some people don't realize. There's a version for North America and there's a version for the rest of the world. So LTE bands on the world version don't exist on the North American version, and the bands on the American version for LTE don't exist on the world version. I do believe, though, there is one LTE band on the world version that will work in Canada, but other than that, don't be expecting much. As for the 3G bands, you should be fine to use both the world version and the North American version pretty much anywhere, and you should be able to get 3G. As for data speed, again, that's something that's very hard to say. It depends on your network and depends on your area. Of course, for your market, you have LTE speeds, and then you also have HSPA plus dual carrier. So that means you're taking bandwidth from two different cell towers and you're combining it for a max speed of 42 megabits per second down. That's actually pretty nice. So if you have this guy on T-Mobile and you don't have LTE in your area, for example, you can get a max theoretical speed of 42 megabits per second down. On AT&T, though, they don't have dual carrier, so that means that you get a max speed of 21 megabits per second down. But otherwise, LTE should be fine on the 700 and 1700 megahertz bands for both AT&T and T-Mobile, and on your dependent market. Moving on to Bluetooth, the number one complaint I always hear is, it doesn't work with my car. So yes, the Nexus 5, I hear people complaining, it doesn't work with my car. But this is a standard issue among every device I've seen. There's always some complaints about whether it will work with your car or not. I don't know. But otherwise, Bluetooth has worked like a champ for me. I just received a few Android Moga game controllers that are powered by Bluetooth. The Nexus 5 has no trouble finding the controllers, and they pair together without drops. So I really can't complain about Bluetooth. As far as Wi-Fi reception goes, I have several different devices here that I am looking to see what the signal strength is like. On the Nexus 5, it says negative 72 in my position right now. On the HTC One, we have negative 72. On the Xperia Z Ultra, we have negative 68. And on the Nexus 7, we have negative 73. So I would say that reception is pretty close to the other devices. And no, I have not had an issue with Wi-Fi reception. Although for this reading, I do have really bad reception again in my room. It's like a metal shielded box in here, I swear. GPS, which is now located underneath location from your toggles, and selecting either device only or high accuracy, which is what I recommend if you're going to be navigating, has worked like a champ as well. I haven't had any issues with the GPS. I've been able to connect quickly with help of Wi-Fi and mobile triangulation, but when navigating, I'm happy to say that I haven't seen a lot of latency in terms of when to turn. That was something that really bothered me with the LG G2, so GPS has been good to me. Now, even though I am not having any complaints about the GPS, I do see some people having some trouble here and there. It's actually an interesting thing. On the back of the Nexus 5 cover, there are contacts. There is one right here in particular, and underneath that is the board. And on the board is the contact for the GPS that meets with the contact on the back cover. The problem that some people are having is that the GPS is not working, and that's been remedied by simply taking off the back cover, putting a piece of cardstock underneath the tape that holds the contact on the back cover, and then placing the back cover back on, and that seems to fix the problem. So if you were having trouble with your GPS, I did see that. I would search for this on xdadevelopers.com. I'll put a link in the description so that you can get to that if this is a problem that you're having. But keep in mind, anytime you modify anything on a phone like this, if you open it up even, you're going to be voiding your warranty. So with this device, I am not having any GPS issue. If you're someone who is faint of heart, I would recommend just simply exchanging it. But if you want to do the mod yourself, it's very easy and simple to fix as well. Lastly, I want to talk about the camera interface and also show you some sample pictures and videos. Again, this is an 8 megapixel shooter on the back. It's optical image stabilized, which is great to protect against motion blur. I would say that the camera application is the bane of this phone's existence, and I really can't wait for an update. It's really pretty terrible. Yes, it's true, it's very slow to focus, and sometimes has quite a bit of an issue focusing on the right thing. I can be tapping on something forever, and instead of focusing on what it's supposed to, it'll focus on this random thing in the background instead of right in the foreground where I want it to be focusing. Also, the controls are atrocious. I really don't like how they can be shown off the display like that. This is something that just simply should not be allowed. I was notified by a nice viewer that in order to pull up the menu, when otherwise you see I would be tapping to focus, you need to put your finger on the display and push upward, and it pulls up the menu here for you. So this is just really wonky. At times I'm not sure what it is that I am doing. There again, it's off the screen. I guess that Google thought this looked pretty neat. Look, you just push upward, gets right into more options, so you shouldn't have to lift a finger at all. Sure, yeah, that's nice, but doesn't work very well in practice. So, the first setting that you can see right here at the far left is HDR+. I will be getting into HDR+. This is exposure compensation. This we have more options. This guy right here is your flash mode, auto off or on, and then you can reverse the camera to the front camera, the 1.3 megapixel front-facing camera. So underneath more options, we have geotagging, we have a timer right here, we have options for picture size, which you can see picture size is up a little bit, so oftentimes it's pushed off the screen so I can't read what it says. So you've got some basic sizes here. We've got options for white balance, and you've also got scene choice. You know, the best thing to do actually is to not mess around with moving your finger around the display. Just hit this. This is your menu. And there you go. It's right in the center. It's never going to be off the display. So that was just your camera mode. Let's go ahead and click here on this menu. We've got photosphere, we've got panorama, we've got video camera, and then of course camera. So let's go ahead and go underneath the video camera. Now, as for settings inside of the video camera, the first thing that I notice is that there is no way to tap to focus. It's all completely autofocus. So just say that you are recording and you tap the screen. It takes an image while you are recording. And just keep in mind that when you're recording and you take an image or a snapshot inside the video, it does slow down the frame rates a little bit. And that's just a limitation of hardware. Don't call it a defect because it's not. So looking at what we have for the menus, you've got white balance settings. You've got more options. So what you have here is options for time lapse. You've got options for video quality and store location. Under video quality, you only have 3 options. You have standard definition, you have 720p and 1080p. Keep in mind that there is no 4K here. We also have the ability to rotate to the front-facing camera, and you have the option to turn on the video light. So you can see that the light is now on. So you've got all of your basic features. Now, one thing to remark about Photosphere is that Photosphere on the Nexus devices is the best 360 panorama software that I have ever come in contact with. I'm actually going to put a link in the description to a video that I had made in winter of last year with the Nexus 4, showing you how to make a perfect photosphere that comes out stitched very, very well. So make sure to check out the link in the description so that you can see exactly how to make a really great photosphere. And now that we have a passable camera here in terms of image quality, I'm really excited.
Nexus 5 could be a really good vlogging camera thanks to the optical image stabilization, but you know, it doesn't track your face, so it focuses on the background, it exposes on the background, and I'm probably completely blurry right now. Too bad. This is another vlog test, this time using the front-facing Nexus 5 camera. And this one is not stabilized in any way. However, the depth of field is large, so Everything should be in focus this time. I'm a bit shaky, sorry for that. In this demo you can see the zooming capability of the video camera on the Nexus 5. The zooming operation is quite smooth actually, and you preserve quite a few details, and the result is very stabilized as well. It's an excellent performance here. In video, Nexus 5 won't focus anything up close. You can see it refuses to focus on the leaf. Oh, incredible! Okay, so it can do it. Now let's see how much time it will need to focus on the background again. Okay, that was quick. Let's focus on the leaf again. No, seems it won't happen.
So thank you everybody for watching. This has been Erica, the technology nerd who likes to film stuff. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. This little device does have its own quirks, but definitely it has great points as well, and for the price you really can't beat it. For the sake of this being a Nexus and because it has the latest operating system, this is a device that I'm going to keep around for quite some time. There really is just something about having a Nexus. So please let me know what all of you think down in the comment section below about this phone. For me, the pluses are that it has a decent screen, it's got a pretty passable camera that's a lot better than what was on the Nexus 4. I have been able to take some pretty nice shots here and there. Even though it doesn't have the best battery life, it does charge very quickly, probably faster than a lot of the phones that I have. And simply that it's a Nexus and I will be getting all the latest and greatest goodies from Google. There's just so much that can be done with a Nexus device. It's the latest and greatest hardware at a fantastic price point. I'm sure many of you will agree with me. Have a good night.